Ted Cruz was the public face of the government shutdown, but just as important was a 31-year-old conservative strategist you've never heard of. And he's our Power Player of the Week. After shutting down the government and almost hitting the debt limit, was it worth it?
The House has been very clear. They said we want to fund the government, but we just don't want to fund Obamacare, and that makes perfect sense. You have a bill that is literally falling apart before our eyes. It's unfair, it's unaffordable, it's unworkable. And the House passed, I think, 4 different bills that would have funded the government with the stipulation that we need a timeout from Obamacare. So it was really the President and Harry Reid who shut the government down.
But you didn't defund Obamacare. You didn't delay Obamacare. And after the final deal, you acknowledged that you're not going to be able to do that until you win the Senate and you win the White House, and the words of President Obama this week, go out and win an election. So what was the point?
I think in terms of a 1-year delay in defunding it, that's absolutely something that could have happened if the House and Senate were as united on the Republican side as they were on the Democrat side and said, look, this bill is not working.
I want to go back to Tuesday. House Speaker Boehner pushed a bill that would show that the GOP was united, that would get a minor concession on Obamacare. And you and Heritage Action came out and urged members to vote no and said, we are going to make this a key vote on our legislative scorecard. And I have to say, it looked like Michael Needham had more clout than the Speaker, because suddenly he didn't have the votes and he had to pull his own bill.
Well, I think that's ridiculous. The House of Representatives deserves a lot of credit for having listened and fought on Obamacare, and that's something that's admirable, listening to the American people.
But I guess my question is, why is it that in the end the House members sided with Michael Needham and not John Boehner?
They didn't. They sided with the American people. What we put out is we put out
sided with your view of what the American people wanted rather than John Boehner's view.
Well, they sided with millions of constituents. Our scorecard is the most transparent scorecard out there. People can go to heritageaction.com and we say, here are the votes that we think are important, here's why we think they're important, and here's how your member of Congress voted.
But you do more than just put out a website. In fact, you'll go door to door during a primary campaign and push your scorecard, correct?
We're going door to door every single day of the year and make sure that people know about the information that's out there, so that they are
and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but what the point is that if somebody had voted for the Boehner bill over your objections and you had said it was a no, you're going to go door to door in his district and say, hey, Congressman so-and-so voted.
We're going to go door to door and explain people's voting record and explain tough questions.
There are a lot of issues out there, entitlements, taxes, spending. Why do you see Obamacare as such a fundamental issue?
Yeah, I think that at the point where the federal government has the right to intrude into the relationship between a patient and its doctor, there is no longer any part of our lives that the federal government doesn't have the right to be in. Healthcare decisions should not be made by bureaucrats in Washington, and I think people all around the country recognize that, and that's why there's so much fear and anger about this law.
The Wall Street Journal says that the Republican Party now has the lowest approval rating since they started doing polling in 1989. Does that bother you?
Well, it bothers me that there's a lot of people who are upset with the Republican Party, let they be conservatives, Republicans, independents, or Democrats. And I think the answer to that is to have a party that stands up strongly for those Reagan-esque principles that made it great. This should be the party of limited government. This should be the party of fighting against Obamacare.
You want to remake the Republican Party, don't you? You want to turn it from the party of Wall Street and the establishment to a libertarian populist party.
The Republican Party has been at its best in 1994, in 2010, with Marco Rubio and Rand Paul and Ted Cruz.
And the party of John Boehner and Mitch McConnell?
This is the party of Ronald Reagan, and I think that the American people have the right to have 2 parties who give very different views of the future. And we have a Democrat Party that represents the progressivism of Woodrow Wilson, that says there's no limit to how far government can intrude into your lives. And there's another party that says limited government and individual responsibility and civil society are those things that allow people to flourish. And I think that if the American people have that clear choice between those 2 parties, the Republican Party will win every time.
Needham started working for the Heritage Foundation, one of Washington's biggest think tanks, straight out of college. And 3 years ago, they named him to start Heritage Action, a political lobbying group.